welcome to the Encephalitis Podcast. Today's guest is Catherine Jessop, who is author of the excellent book, and here it is, which is called Pulling Through, and it's help for families navigating life-changing illness, something that I think many of the people listening to this podcast will know all about. This is Catherine's first book, and it's also two things, really. It's a memoir of her experiences caring for her husband, Alan, who became ill with encephalitis 5 years ago. But also, secondly, it's a guide really for anyone who may suddenly find themselves navigating the often confusing and often very scary world of hospitals, doctors, medical jargon, recovery and rehabilitation, and much more, in fact. Pulling Through really struck a chord with me as it explores a lot of what interests me as an academic and as an individual and as a researcher. And that's really about patients and carers' experiences of encephalitis and how listening to their stories can only help professionals to be better caregivers. So, Catherine, welcome to the Encephalitis Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's nice to be here. Thank you, Ava.
I'm thrilled. Well, look, we'll cut right into it. Pulling Through begins on Boxing Day 2016. Tell us what happened and how Alan's and your family's life changed from that point.
Well, it was very dramatic, and I know often the onset of encephalitis is not nearly as dramatic as it was for our family, but for us, it was Boxing Day. We were having just a normal family gathering, everything. We were a very, I would say, ordinary family. I've got 3 children. We've got 3 children. The oldest 2 girls were at university. My son, Sam, that was 13 at the time. So we were all together down at my parents', enjoying just a completely normal family Christmas, all chatting and laughing. And just as he was telling a joke, my husband, Alan, which was extremely typical of him, very convivial, all laughing, all jolly, he froze. And for a split second, I thought he was sort of having a bit of a joke, a bit of a laugh. But within that absolute microsecond, his face completely froze and he fell completely over. He just totally collapsed and was completely unconscious. And if I hadn't been standing there, he would have absolutely crashed to the floor, but he sort of fell onto me. And it was just the most shocking thing you can imagine, really. It was exactly as if I was talking to you now and that happened. Absolute chaos. I'd done a first aid course. I worked in a school, so something in me, I went into doing CPR. My sister called an ambulance. It was all extremely dramatic. He was rushed off into hospital. And fast forwarding a bit, the hospital I thought it was maybe a stroke, maybe a heart attack, didn't really know what it was. By the time he got to hospital in the ambulance, he had recovered, although I now know he hadn't, but it seemed like he'd recovered. Sent him home after a night in hospital. Just one of those things, doctors couldn't really explain it. Maybe a collapse from working too hard or whatever. The next couple of weeks, were very odd looking back because we thought he was completely recovered. Then he went on to have several more seizures, which the doctors then thought was maybe epilepsy. And at the same time, there was just things were starting to be a bit odd. He was speaking in a different way. He wasn't himself. But of course, at the time, this part of my book, which is the very beginning of the book, really is written in the present tense. So hopefully you get an idea of what it was like, really, to be just so bewildered and confused. And then he had a much more serious seizure and was taken back into hospital. And from that point, everything happened really very quickly. He was in intensive care for a week. He went into a coma. And at that point, we really didn't know whether he would live or die. And that had all happened really within 2 weeks. So we're sort of now in the middle of January. That was an absolutely awful time, of course, because we just didn't know what was going to happen. He came round. By then, the doctors had thought diagnosed encephalitis. And that was, he went into hospital on the 16th of January. He didn't come home until the 29th of November. So he was then in hospital, several hospitals, including rehabilitation, pretty much for the whole of that year, the whole of 2017. I know encephalitis isn't always as dramatic as that, and there isn't always that trajectory, but yeah, that was basically what happened to us, and it was absolutely confusing and bewildering. And what I wanted to do with the book really was try and help anyone who is in a similar situation, both with encephalitis, but actually with any illness, because any dramatic illness or an accident or anything like that can often, I think almost everybody has that feeling straight away of, this can't be happening. What is happening? This must be a dream. That this just doesn't happen to ordinary families like us, that you just go from 1 minute to everything being completely ordinary, and then the next minute your life has changed. I describe in the book as if we've all slipped into a parallel universe, and to be honest, that's exactly what it felt like. And sometimes it still feels like that. Sometimes I think all of us in our family still kind of think, oh my gosh, like that time before Dad, Alan, my husband, got ill, it almost feels like you could go back there and wake up and go, oh, the last 5 years was all a dream. It didn't happen. It really does feel like our lives changed very dramatically.
Yeah, and I guess, there are going to be many more families now, having had this pandemic for the last 18 months, who have had similar experiences to yours. Many more than there would have been, I guess, at the point that you started writing the book. Who knew that we were going to go into this, further dreadful episode for so many families around the world? Was it in some ways, you talked about there being several weeks before there was this encephalitis diagnosis. Was it in some ways was it a relief to get the encephalitis diagnosis after those kind of weeks of uncertainty?
Yes, it was. And I think that's the other thing, that I had no idea until we were in hospital, that there were illnesses that you've never heard of that are rare or unusual, but nevertheless people still do get them. And again, I think most people think that they'll have heard of most of the things, and surely if something's rare and unusual, then that's going to mean that ordinary families don't get it. So yeah, we'd never heard the word. I remember saying encephalitis, like, what is that? And as soon as when they said they knew what it was, yes, it was a relief. They told us very early on that there were basically 3 different sorts. It could be viral, it could be bacterial, and it could be autoimmune. And they said very early on that they hoped it was caused by some sort of infection, because that was a lot easier to treat than if it was an autoimmune illness, which, as you know, and probably many of the listeners know, is basically where your body is mistakenly attacking itself. And with the encephalitis, it was antibodies in your blood that shouldn't be there, that are attacking your brain. And we really hope, we said, oh my goodness, I hope it's not autoimmune encephalitis, because they made it very clear that was far more complicated. And of course it turned out it was autoimmune encephalitis. So it was a relief to have it diagnosed. But of course, as soon as we discovered more about encephalitis, we thought, my goodness, there's a lot to that. That's a very complex illness, and the doctors were very clear about that it was complex. I also hadn't appreciated at all. I mean, it's a funny thing, because in some ways, of course, you'd have to say we were really unlucky. Alan was very unlucky to get encephalitis, because it isn't particularly common. Autoimmune encephalitis perhaps even less so. But in other ways, I think now I've come through it, I realise we were very lucky, in the sense that the science of diagnosing encephalitis is still incredibly new and incredibly cutting edge. And the actual test to discover the antibodies that were in Alan's blood was only developed in 2010. So, if he got ill not very much longer ago, then they wouldn't have even known what it was. And the doctors, to be honest, were very frank about that. They said, just a decade ago, we'd have said, yes, one doctor said, yes, unexplained madness. That's what we'd have said. Just, don't know what it is, but he seems to have gone mad. So yeah, it is a help to know what something it is. And I can't tell you how astonished I was to discover how much science there is behind all the tests they can do, and indeed the treatments they can do for encephalitis. As you say, I think in this last year with the pandemic, it's made ordinary people an awful lot more aware of just how absolutely breathtaking the science advances of medicine have been, and how incredibly quickly things are progressing, which, as I say, was entirely to our advantage, really, because that was of huge benefit to Alan.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, having specialised in encephalitis for over 2 decades now, I can tell you, 20 years ago there was really no research into this condition. Once acyclovir had been discovered and used as a treatment for herpes simplex encephalitis, for many years after that there was very, very little research going on. So I think it's extremely heartening. I agree with you how much more of a focus there is. I was intrigued. I remembered something when you were talking then about not having heard of encephalitis, and I remember talking to one family and whose son had become ill, and when the doctor was talking to the parents, he said, well, it could be one of 3 things. It could be a brain tumour, it could be meningitis, or it could be encephalitis. And the family said to me, they said, well, we'll take that one, we'll take the last one, because they knew that meningitis and a brain tumour were really bad. And the doctor looked at them and he said, no, that's the last one that you want.
Yes, absolutely. No, that's very much that. I can completely understand that, because actually we very much hoped it was. I mean, I hoped it was a brain tumour, which, as you say, is extraordinary, because obviously nobody wants to have a brain tumour. But I think at the beginning, once they'd ruled out, I mean, to start with, I thought it was a stroke, probably. When Alan collapsed, I thought it was a stroke, because in some ways the symptoms were probably quite similar. And I know encephalitis often doesn't start with seizures or anything like that. But actually the signs were there after that first seizure with Alan. The other signs of encephalitis that aren't like a stroke, for Alan, the confusion, the lack of knowing where he was, even though he was somewhere very familiar, all that sort of thing were there. But of course, we had no idea to look for that was, we thought it was just the medication after his first seizure that was making him a bit confused. And yeah, we hoped it was a brain tumor, because we thought, mistakenly, I think, that, if it's a brain tumor, they'll cut it out and that'll be that, it'll all be fine. I mean, I think the other thing we absolutely didn't appreciate about encephalitis, and probably many illnesses, is that even though the doctors and the medical science can cure to a certain extent the encephalitis, the damage that having encephalitis had done to Alan's brain was permanent. So it wasn't, and I think that's the case with a lot of illnesses, and indeed actually COVID. It's not just the thing itself, it's the damage it wreaks on your body while it's rampaging through it. And that's the thing that the families, the person themselves, of course, and the families are going to have to live with for a very long time. And I think that's definitely the thing that I didn't know, I didn't really think about. I suppose I sort of thought hospitals and doctors are in the business of curing you, and then you all carry on as normal. And now I appreciate it's not really that simple.
Yeah, no, it's just brought to my mind, I think there was a Duchenne muscular dystrophy campaign that was quite controversial, and it was a poster campaign, I think, of a child, and it simply said, I wish my child had cancer. Because treating Duchenne muscular dystrophy, of course, is something that's quite elusive, whereas cancer, at least you've got a fighting chance of being able to treat. So yeah, I completely get it. But look, you write in the book about how the balance of your life partnership changed from that first night. And so talk to us a little bit about that and how you navigated that.
Yes. That was difficult. That was very difficult. It's very difficult, I think, if you've been married to someone. We've been married for 23 years, to completely adjust from being a wife and a partner, an equal partner, to being a carer. And that is, I would say, something that I am still absolutely progressing through. And I very much felt with the book that I wanted to be very honest about that and exactly what that entailed. To start with, when Alan came home from hospital after pretty much being in there a year, he had occupational therapists, working with him to help him being at home. And one of the things they'd quite often say is, "Oh, we're here to help get Alan back. We're going to get your husband back for you," kind of thing. And I mean, to be honest, I found that incredibly annoying, because that wasn't possible. That wasn't possible. And I think I can see why they say that. And of course, every recovery is different. And, some people do absolutely, of course, make a full recovery from encephalitis, but, a lot of people don't. And I think that's the case with any illness. And another thing that was intensely annoying, and one of the things I've done in the book is there are lists of things to say to people if they're seriously ill, and there are things not to say to people if they're seriously ill. And one of the things is the whole, "Oh, I heard someone talking on the radio and they made a full recovery and it's amazing what drugs can do. And yes, my friends had that and they're perfectly okay now." So you think, well, that's not helpful, because that does not apply to everybody. And I think definitely the idea that we were somehow going to reach back and get the old Alan was just completely misleading. And there is absolutely, again, a conclusion really that I come to in the book, that for us as a family, I think it is much more important that we adjust and adapt to the new Alan rather than always searching for the old Alan, because I just that is just pointless. And I think there's a whole chapter about recovery and rehabilitation and what rehabilitation can do and what it can't do. The Encephalitis website was extremely helpful with that, because again, a lot of people, I think, when you talk about someone who's been seriously ill, they think that rehabilitation and recovery, you're getting back to where you were to start with before the person was ill, and absolutely that is not what you're doing. You I think you should be measuring from when the person was their most ill and progressing from that onwards. And very much as a family, we like to feel that we're moving forwards, always moving forwards. But I think, trying to get back to where we were on Boxing Day 2016 that's not going to happen. And I think it's not helpful to think that. So, yeah, I think it was very hard to adjust. It was hard to adjust, and it is hard to adjust. But I think it can be done. And I hope as a family that we have done that. We have adjusted. We have moved forward.
I think those are really wise words, actually, Catherine. Sometimes I think certainly the support team at the Encephalitis Society and I, some families that we work with, some parents that we work with, they expend this inordinate amount of energy trying to get back the person that was before. And sometimes some people get stuck there and they almost end up spending the rest of their life, and I mean the rest of their life, in this hamster wheel of trying to get back the child, the son, the daughter, whatever it is that they had before. And so I think it's wise words indeed. You talked about this extraordinary length of time that Alan spent in hospital, which I think totaled about 318 nights, which almost a year. What did you do during those days? What was that like for you and your family? How did you spend them?
Well, I think, I decided very early on that I would go into hospital every day and see Alan. Obviously at the beginning, of course, I was going to go in every day. When he was extremely ill in the coma, we were in pretty much 24/7. But once it became obvious, I remember the moment that a doctor said to me, "This is going to take a long time to treat." And I said, "Well, how long?" And I know, and one of the things, again, I've learned in the book is doctors do not like guessing. They do not like hypothesizing about what might and might not happen, which, again, as a patient or as a family of the patient, can be incredibly frustrating because you just want answers. So I said, "Well, come on, give me some idea. Are we talking days? Are we talking weeks? Are we talking months? Are we talking years? What are we talking here? And she said, months. It will be many, many months. And I was just aghast, really, because we were still kind of thinking, oh, they'll sort this out and then I'll come home and, it'll be fine. And months along, aren't they? So once I knew that, I thought, okay, he is going to be in hospital for months. And it is going to be, yes, it's going to be hard for the whole family. My two daughters were at university. So of course that, they went back to university. They came and visited as often as they could, but, they absolutely needed to get on with their lives. My son was at school, he was 13. So he needed to, get on with his life. And I decided I was going to come in every morning and almost treat it like a job, really, I suppose. Come in, hear what the doctors had to say, and just kind of keep always looking for the next bit of day and the next bit of progress. But even though I knew it was going to be months, I suppose I didn't expect it to be quite so many months. There's quite a lot in the book where I say, if I'd known how long the whole thing was going to be, it's probably just as well I didn't know, because it would have absolutely knocked me back, and I just thought, well, let's just keep taking each day at a time. There's one section at the beginning where I've said that there are basically lots of different ways of dealing with illness, and I think all of those ways are valid, and there isn't a right way of doing it. And I think often, people will tell you, oh, you should do this, you should do that, and I think you've absolutely got to find the right way for you. And for me, the right way was just to keep going, keep doing it one day at a time, do something, just move forward. Other people I know want to, as you say, research everything about it, look up what there is to do. But I thought, no, I'm going to come into hospital, I'm going to completely trust what the doctors say, and I'm just going to keep going with it one day at a time. But yeah, to start with, I thought I would just write a book about hospitals, because that experience of pretty much spending every day of a year in hospital, there was so much information. And I realized really early on that although the doctors are telling you stuff about the medical, what's happening with Alan, absolutely nobody is telling you anything else, and just how hospitals work, what all the medical words mean, all the different bits of jargon, what all the different doctors do, why they're all wearing different coloured uniforms, what all the scans are doing, what all the tests are going. I mean, almost every day a doctor would use a word, just a word like an MRI scan or a CT scan, or they'd say this is acute, or they'd say, all these medical words. And most people, I don't think, have got a clue what any of them actually mean. They'd say, oh, he's going to have a colonoscopy, or he's going to have a gastro this, or so again, I thought, my goodness me, I think there is a need for just something that explains the basic mechanics of how hospitals work and what all these words mean, and what you're sort of almost expected to know. And I completely understand that doctors are, they're far too busy treating the patient to sit down with the family and explain, oh, this is how it's going to work. He's going to be in this room. He's going to be moved to that room. I mean, even I think the experience when most people go to A&E, they think, oh my goodness me, what is happening here? Who are all these different nurses? What does triage mean? Why am I moving around? Why am I in this room? Why am I in that room? So all of that, I thought, golly, you just want someone to kind of explain to you in ordinary plain English what the flip is going on with a hospital. But then, yes, after the year in hospital, as I was thinking, okay, and then becoming a carer is also something that, could do with a bit of explanation. So it went from being a book about hospitals. But yes, to start with, my working sort of title was A Hospital Handbook, because I just thought that's the bit that you just, it's bewildering, isn't it, if you go into hospitals, if you've pretty much never been in a hospital before.
Yeah, I think that's right. It is yours and Alan's story, but it is also, as you say, perfect words there, is this hospital handbook, talking about these practical areas. I think you even talk about car parking tips, which I'm sure many people will find useful. So it is much more than a memoir. It does offer advice for people who find themselves in a similar situation. Was that then the catalyst for why you decided to write the book, and actually at what point did you decide to write the book?
I quite late on, I suppose, in a sense. I from the very beginning I was jotting down things on my phone, because I'm a writer. I haven't written a book before, but I'd written website copy and copywriting, that sort of thing. So I suppose writing is relatively sort of natural way. And for me, I found it very helpful to sort of process what was going on by just writing down what was going on, which actually I would say, again, everybody is different, but I think that most people would find that helpful. I think if it's not necessarily, I wasn't writing to be published at all to start with. I was writing to help me understand what was going on. And the other thing I was doing was I think anyone who has got someone who becomes ill, one of the first things that's going to hit them is that they are going to have to relay a lot of information to other people in the family or to friends of the person or whatever. And that in itself is absolutely exhausting, because it's never just, well, it's unusual if it's just you. There's usually going to be all sorts of other people that you'll need, that will be interested and will say, oh, what's happening with Alan? Can you tell me what happened today? What did the doctor say? How ill is he? Da, 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 da. So we set up a family WhatsApp group, just for the really close family. So it was my friend, my children. Alan has got 2 older children, so my 2 stepchildren, and also Alan's sister. So there was quite a group of us. And actually, every day after I'd seen the doctors and found out a little bit more, I summarised it on this family WhatsApp group to tell them. And it was a huge advantage, actually. And again, I would absolutely recommend doing something like that. If you are the primary carer or the wife of somebody who becomes ill, because otherwise you can come home from, when I came home from hospital in the evening, sometimes having spent all day there, you are absolutely exhausted. And really, to be honest, the last thing you want to do is spend hours and hours on the phone talking to people. So actually the writing it down on a WhatsApp group was very helpful to me. I did it on the tube as I was coming back from the hospital, and it kind of meant I'd sort of processed it all in my head. I'd written it down, and everybody knew. So it was kind of done. So I think the documenting process, I think, is helpful. I think it would be helpful for anybody. And as I said, very early on, I thought, is there something out there? Is there a book out there? Because I'm from a publishing background, I was like, oh my gosh, is there a book out there that's going to help? And there are absolutely books about encephalitis, and there are lots of books about other serious illnesses, but there didn't seem to be anything that was just a sort of general what to do when someone gets ill. I mean, I think to start with, I almost thought of it as a sort of survival book. My publishers eventually thought the word survival was a bit bleak, so they were like, no, let's not put survival in the title. That sounds a bit too much black humor. But it was like that. I was kind of thinking, golly, you just want something just to help you keep your head above water here. So yeah, I was writing it down, partly to process it myself, partly to tell the rest of the family. And increasingly over that first year, I was thinking, wow, when this is kind of all over, I think that, there might be a market for this, because I think almost every single day, I would say, I found out something that I thought, that's helpful, that's useful, that would be helpful for someone else in my situation. Sometimes it was a really tiny thing, and sometimes it was an absolutely huge thing, like goodness me, why has nobody told me this? But yeah, and I suppose it was probably a year after Alan came home, by which time, he was living at home, I was his carer. And I started to formulate it a bit more in my head and think, okay, I'm going to approach a publisher here and see if this is something they'd be interested in.
If there was one thing that you hoped people would take away from the book, what would it be?
I think one thing that I found out that is the value, I suppose, of connecting with other people and talking to other people, and sharing experiences. I actually think before Alan got ill, I think I was much more I was a much more private person, and much less likely to talk to other people, to ask for help, I suppose, in any sort of context, really. I was quite sort of self-sufficient. I think we were quite a self-sufficient sort of family. And I think I don't know why, but I think I realized fairly early on that actually that illness can be a very, very lonely thing, for the person, of course, that's experiencing it. But actually, I think carers can find their lives very lonely. And I think that is something that you can remedy by sharing and talking to other people. And almost as soon as I went into hospital, I was chatting to the other people on the ward, and finding out things from them. And actually, I realized that helped me. It helped me enormously, actually, just to share experiences, talk to people, say, oh, what are you in here for? Alan, my husband, he used to be far, far, far more chatty than me. I would say I was the more reserved person, and he was the person that could talk to absolutely everybody. And I suppose very, almost instantly the roles was reversed, and that he was, to start with, yes, so well he couldn't talk. So I kind of had to talk, I suppose. And connecting with other people has made a massive, massive difference, I think, to the whole experience. And right the way through, once we got through it, connecting with like the Encephalitis Society, and there's a brilliant society called Headway, charity who deals with people who've had brain injuries. We've been along to some of their meetings, and again, you just realize, my goodness, the people that are going through illness on their own is absolutely horrendous. Alan, he would say, he knows he was lucky that he had me. He was lucky that he had his family, because I think, going through something by yourself is awful, and so much harder. So I think the one thing I would say is that, yes, make as many connections as possible. Talk to people, join charities, talk to societies, talk to other people. Just, connect, I think, is one of the most useful things I think I've learned over the experience.
Connect, and that's why Connect is the name of our newsletter, of course, because you're absolutely right. So what advice would the Catherine of today give to the Catherine who was beginning this journey 5 years ago?
That's quite tricky, because it is quite difficult to look back and kind of almost remember. I do feel, we're all different. I think the thing that's probably helped me, and luckily, I suppose I was this person. The book is ultimately positive, and I would say I'm a positive person. I've always been quite a positive person. I think I learned that from my mum, who is the sort of person who's very, glass half full. She was always very upbeat, even if it was pouring with rain. She'd be the sort of person that would say, no, it's going to brighten up in a minute, we'll be able to have our picnic. So I think that kind of optimism is massively helpful, and I always was an optimistic person, and I think that stood me in extremely good stead through this experience. And I do think, and there's actually an entire chapter really in the book about almost how to train yourself to be optimistic, because of course not everybody is. And I think when you are bombarded with bad news, which many illnesses can do, you know, day after day you're discovering, okay, we can't do this, we can't do that, it isn't going to be good news. It can be hard to be optimistic, and I think I would definitely say that I'm not talking about pretending that everything is always fine, because I think that is not right, and I don't think that's necessarily helpful. But I think you can be resilient, and you can think how you will deal with things realistically, but with a positive angle to that realism. So and I think that's especially important perhaps when you're talking to children about illness, which again, there's a lot in the book about how to talk to children, how small children deal with illness, how teenagers deal with illness, and again, what I've learned along the way about that. And I think you have got to be realistic, but I do feel that being positive, even if you can't be positive about the illness, you can be positive about how you'll deal with it. I suppose that's what I'm saying. And I think that's one of the things that I think has helped me. It's like you absolutely cannot think just because you believe that everything will be all right, it will be all right. Because if there is one thing that awful experience of the encephalitis taught me, it's that actually there isn't always a happy ending. There is not always a happy ending with illness. And absolutely, Alan, you know, the hospital did a wonderful job, but you know, he has been left with permanent brain damage, and that is not, no amount of optimism can put a spin on that. But you can be optimistic about how you are going to deal with illness, even if you're not optimistic about the illness itself. So I think if I was looking back on myself, I would say to anyone in that situation, try and be positive about how you are going to deal with it, because you can deal with this. I truly do believe that everybody has the capability to deal with serious illness, however bad and how serious it is. You can do this. You can't will yourself well. I absolutely don't believe that, but you can. You are in control of your own emotions, and you can influence those. And importantly, I think you absolutely can influence how the other people around you see illness as well, and deal with it.
It comes back to that age-old adage, doesn't it, of you can't change what happens to you, but you can change the way that you respond to things.
Absolutely. I think that is absolutely valid, and I think that's something that's extremely important to bear in mind with illness, because I think, as I think you said earlier, sometimes people get very stuck with an illness as serious as encephalitis, thinking, I want it to be different, I want a different outcome. And sometimes people with any serious illness do an awful lot of research themselves and think, oh my goodness, maybe the doctors have got it wrong, maybe we can find out something ourselves, maybe we can go abroad and we'll get a different answer. And of course, that's absolutely your right to deal with it if that's how you want to deal with it. But I think sometimes that absolutely is the fact. You cannot make a difference to the illness itself. You can't, unfortunately. Medical science can't do everything, but you absolutely can make a difference to how you deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think sometimes the media and our TV influences people's behaviours as well. I think people watch Casualty and Holby City and various other things, and you know, everybody wakes up from the coma and goes straight to the toilet or has a cup of tea or something. Of course, it isn't like that, and there's always a diagnosis and all of these things. And of course, actually, real medicine isn't like that. Often there's not a diagnosis, and often we don't know. As you said, if this had have happened to Alan 10 years ago, they would have simply said to you, well, he's gone mad, we don't know why, but he has. And I think that's an important point to get across. You talked about there about how to talk to children, about how to talk to other people about these things. And one of the things that has struck me really is that I think there's probably a role for this book for health professionals as well, in understanding what it's like for patients and carers and family members when they talk to them about the health of their loved one. Is there any advice that you would give to a doctor, a nurse, or a consultant if they were listening to this, in terms of how to approach patients and families?
Yes, absolutely. No, I think you're right. And I think the publishers, Jessica Kingsley, my publisher, Absolutely, very much. They do a lot of books that deal directly with health professionals and the kind of educational side of publishing. And I think that very much so that doctors don't always necessarily realise what the patient experience is like. I mean, Alan's neurologist and your own president, actually, Tom Solomon, have both read the book, and Alan's neurologist especially said that I mean, they were very complimentary about it, which is obviously really nice. But they both said that it taught them a lot. I mean, Alan's neurologist said, "My goodness, reading that makes me extremely proud of what we're doing." But she said it also makes me realize what we could do better, because there are moments, I am very honest in the book about times when doctors say something and you just think, I have no idea, you don't seem to have any idea of how that's coming across to us as a family. I mean, I think one of the things that I found most frustrating perhaps was that all the way through when Alan was in hospital, doctors were continually saying, and he saw so many doctors, that's the other thing I think that you don't realize in a hospital, that you almost certainly will not just see one doctor. I think everybody thinks they'll have a doctor, it'll be someone they really like and they'll be their sort of trusted person forever and ever, and it isn't like that in hospitals. Certainly the hospital Alan was in, every single day it was a different doctor. They were on a rota. Sometimes we saw the same one, but it was usually months later and you'd think, oh my goodness me, here you are again. And they always said, oh, this is very interesting. This encephalitis is extremely rare. We don't see many. Alan's case this is very good. They often brought medical students in, but they never, ever, ever told us anything about where all the information that they were finding out from Alan went. I mean, how was it useful? And they and that, I think it would have helped us as a family enormously to know that everything that was being found out from Alan was going to be helpful in the future with other patients, with studies, with research. And they just never said that. They always said, oh yes, goodness me, this, and wrote reams and reams of notes. And you just thought, well, where are all those notes going? How, what is all this information, these great big fat files, what's it being used for? And as soon as I'd said that in the book and Alan's neurologist read it, she said, oh my goodness, yes, I get it. I can tell you absolutely there's this study and there's that study and there's this case in America and and all of this information that we found out is being used. And I can see that for a patient, that's a really positive thing to know, isn't it? That your things that they're finding out are being used to help other people. But I think doctors sometimes, well, I don't think we ever once had a doctor tell us firsthand something about the research aspect of the illness or something that they were using. It was always just very much, I get that they absolutely can't share confidential information about other patients, but I think that can be very frustrating, that you feel you're being dealt with a little bit on a conveyor belt of patients and you're not allowed to see anything behind the scenes about what's happening. And I think that would help patients a lot if they were allowed to feel that their experience and was being, was useful to the whole system.
That the experience is contributing in some way.
Absolutely.
To
Yes.
the betterment of other people. I know whenever we're involved in research, the doctors and scientists and researchers that we're involved with are often surprised at how keen the encephalitis community are in participating and being part of this. And it's for the same reasons. It's to know that those that are going to follow in your footsteps, and people surely are going to follow in Alan's footsteps and other encephalitis patients, unfortunately, that actually maybe their experience will be, just in some small way a bit better because of the contribution of your experiences.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's right. I mean, I think that's the entire, one of the reasons for writing the book was to give the patient experience some validity. I mean, it's very much not a book about what it's like to have encephalitis, because actually Alan has never really been able to articulate that himself. I know some encephalitis people who've had encephalitis can articulate that and have written other books, and I've been to some of your events and people have spoken about the experience, and that's very moving and very interesting. But my book was very much to show what the families and carers of people with encephalitis were experiencing, because I think that the patient experience and the carer experience, I think, often is not reflected in what you can see on the NHS website, or from the doctors themselves. They'll kind of give you the medical stats, but they won't tell you what is it actually like to be ill, to be in hospital, to be a carer. That's a very different experience, I think.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Well, look, how is Alan today after all of this that we've chatted through? What's the situation now?
Well, he is, that's an interesting question, because I think people often say, oh, is Alan getting better? Is Alan getting better? And absolutely, he is getting better, but not in the way that they mean, really, I don't think. In that the encephalitis basically left him with permanent brain injury, just the way that a brain tumour or a stroke or anything like that might. So there's bits of his brain that are damaged, and those bits are not going to get better. But as you know, there is a lot of debate about how well a brain recovers from an injury and exactly how well it can rewire itself, and that we know that brains you can't grow new brain cells, but the analogy the doctors used, which I think is a good analogy, is if some of the synapses in the brain, it's like driving along a road. If that road becomes all dug up and potholed and bumpy so that the brain can't make the connections because the road is all bumpy, then a better plan might be to take a shortcut and go another way round. And that's, I think, Alan can learn to do things in a different way. The brain injury has left him with a lack of what I think psychologists call executive function, which basically means he can't make decisions. He can't really look forward and hypothesize about things. He's living very much in a sort of here and now world. And if he's going to learn something new, then it's going to take genuinely months, if not years, of repetition for him to learn that, because the biggest and the easiest thing to get your head around is that he has absolutely no short-term memory. So anything that happens, literally, and it's as exact as I can be to the minute, almost within about 15 minutes, he will have forgotten it, which is almost like a kind of, this maybe sounds a bit macabre, but it's almost like a party trick, in that if he ever it goes back into hospital and occasionally they think, oh, let's just test that bit a bit, I just absolutely know they'll do the test where they tell him words or he writes down things or whatever, and it's almost like you can go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you've forgotten it, and it's a complete blank slate, which obviously means that learning anything is very hard, because if you haven't got any short-term memory, you can't hold things in your head long enough for them to learn. So to give an analogy, if he would never know what day it was. And if I spent the whole day saying, it's Monday, it's Monday, it's Monday, it's Monday, it's Monday, by the time he'd learned that it was Monday, it will be Tuesday. So there would be no point. Whereas something like learning, for example, that every day every day has a sort of schedule, and he is gradually learning that every day he'll wake up at 9 o'clock. I'll wake him up. He knows where the shower is. He can do things with endless repetition. And he absolutely, if he was chatting to you now, you probably wouldn't notice any difference, because he can do here and now. He can do small talk. He can do, oh, you look nice. How are you? What? It's a nice sunny day. All that sort of stuff. So yeah, he is getting better, because he is learning to adapt to the fact that he has got a brain injury. But the brain injury itself is not going to get better. But both he and, I guess, the rest of our family are learning and adapting to living with that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of it is about adapting to the situation that you find yourself in. Can he remember things from long ago then? Can he remember you getting married or, having your children, things like that? What's his long-term memory like?
Not great, in that he wouldn't be able to remember any of the specifics of us getting married. So, I mean, I guess, yeah, he remembered that we were married, but he wouldn't be able to remember what the day was like or where we got married or anything like that. He often thinks the children, for example, are a lot younger than they are. So it's often as if his sort of memory of the time frame is very, very hazy. So and again, that's one of the things, in the book that I talk about, is the difficulty of children becoming carers, because my son Sam, certainly, who was 13 when Al was ill, very much became a child carer. And another thing I want to do is raise the awareness of that. Apparently Carers UK reckon about 1 in every 6 children are providing some sort of care to a relation with a disability of some sort. And I think that's, again, something that I just had absolutely no idea about. But a special difficulty, I would say, in that respect with my children looking after Al is that he doesn't remember that that's the case. So he still thinks he's in charge of them rather than them in charge of him, if you see what I mean. So if I'm going out for an evening and leaving Sam, say, who's now 18, to look after Al, Al still thinks Sam's about 12, and B, will therefore say as I go out, oh, right, so what time does Sam need to go to bed, and what shall I cook for Sam's supper? And I'll be like, Sam is cooking your supper and you'll be going to bed before Sam does, kind of thing. And yeah, so in that sense, he's very woolly about sort of timings.
Right. Well, we're coming towards the end of this podcast, but I've got a couple of important questions for you. First of all, people that are watching this or listening this, how can they get a copy of Pulling Through?
Well, they can go on Amazon, first of all, the mighty Amazon. But if they don't want to go on Amazon, then they can also go onto the Waterstones website, has got it as well, or they can go into their local Waterstones or any other bookshop and order it there. Waterstones, I'm pleased to say, are really supporting it. So they'll definitely be able to get it online from Waterstones. And if they've got a local Waterstones to them and then they go in, they should be able to find it there too. But yeah, absolutely, it is on Amazon. So just type in Pulling Through or Catherine Jessop onto Amazon and it should come straight up. It's published next week. So it's published on the 19th, which I think is pretty much a week today. So week tomorrow. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to mention that I haven't asked you before we finish up the podcast today?
No, I don't think so, really. I mean, I think that, everybody that is involved with the Encephalitis Society is doing an absolutely amazing job, because I think, as I said, it's very lonely when you're ill and when you discover you've got an illness which many people haven't heard of. And I think that the charities, including the Encephalitis Society, but there are so many charities throughout the UK who are just absolutely vital to patients' recovery and the families of patients. So I very much want to kind of almost give a shout out to all the charities. Carers UK, there's some local charities to us who have done respite care with Alan. Headway have been fantastic for brain injuries. And I just think, if there's one thing, when people say, is there anything I can do? I think supporting the charities who support the patients and the families is absolutely something you can do, because I really do think the NHS is absolutely wonderful, but I had not realised that without the network of charities that we're lucky enough to have in the UK, I think so many people would just be massively struggling. I mean, I know we would be. It's the medical science that cured Alan, as it were, or that made him well, but it's been the charities that have held us and supported us through. So yeah, I would say just absolutely, support charities. They are absolutely fantastic.
Well, thanks, Catherine. I appreciate that. I will try not to now get on my political soapbox and tell the government why they should be helping charities who've been profoundly affected, during the last 18 months when, we've been in a position where, we've not been able to hold a single fundraising event. But anyway, I will not get on that political soapbox, but thank you for those kind words. We're really, really grateful to you for taking the time to chat with us today, Catherine. I know that you're, I think, going to be at the Encephalitis Society My Brain, My Story event, which I think is in Aston University near Birmingham in October.
Yes.
Our society services continue. So if anybody who's watching this or listening to this needs any support or information, then our teams remain at your service. You can go to encephalitis.info for contact details, or to indeed chat online with any of the team. And Catherine's call to action, if you can support our work at this very challenging time, then please visit encephalitis.info/donate. But it remains that we need all of you to continue to keep up that personal hygiene, washing your hands, staying safe, getting vaccinated, and of course, buying a copy now of Pulling Through, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.